Welcome back to the Warrior Servant Leader podcast. We're so glad you're joining us today. And for this particular episode, I normally don't do shout outs, but I got to give a shout out to Chad Coe and Brig Avery for introducing me to our next guest, which we're going to have an incredible conversation with. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about him. The worst news that he says turned out to be an absolute blessing was on his 48th birthday in 2015. He received the news from his doctor that he had lymphoma in the form of massive tumors on his heart and in his neck. 6 months and several rounds of chemo later, he was cured, and he had the experience that led to the last chapter of his second book called A Trek Within, Following Your Inner Compass. Now, oddly, he'd been working on that book for almost 10 years, and his journey with cancer tied the entire book together. The book, which is a collection of experiences that changed the way our guest views spirituality, the world, and his place in it, was officially released in early December 2023. And I love his mindset here. When you're going through things, you have to roll with it. Please welcome to the Warrior Servant Leader podcast, Rob Ryan Sullivan. Rob, dude, it's great to have you here. And you're coming to us all the way from London, England. Yeah. So this is awesome. So how you doing, man?
I'm doing great. And thank you for that great intro. I love it. Yeah. No, I'm very excited to be here. Brig spoke very highly of you.
Well, and I of him. So it's great. I just want to jump right into the conversation because you're a high drive kind of guy, been all over the world, 70 plus countries, spoken and taught and trained incredible number of people from all walks of life, and then cancer hits.
Yeah.
Getting that C word diagnosis. And did you get it in person or over the phone?
I got it over the phone.
Okay. Yeah, that sucks. Take us back to that. The last 11 years, who was Rob before 2015 and who's Rob now, and what's the journey?
No, that's I love the way you put that. So Rob now is a different, although I mean there are some days that you could argue, but a calmer, more grateful version of the same Rob. The change in me was largely spiritual and emotional in terms of opening me up to things that I didn't feel or acknowledge or even wasn't aware of before. Specifically, and it sounds cliche or corny or whatever, but like literally the love that surrounds us. There were people who showed up in my life when I went through that it blew my mind. They were complete strangers in many cases. And, friends that I hadn't seen in 20 years who, one friend who flew from Philadelphia or Pittsburgh rather, to be in Chicago during one of my last treatments and help out, and just remarkable the things that people would do. So, but that moment was, you had asked about the having a flashback, not necessarily a bad one, but I remember I was standing in my living room. I was living in a townhouse in Chicago at the time. And it was my birthday. I'd gotten up early to get my scan because I thought I don't really want to waste my day at the hospital. Let's get it done before you end up waiting forever because of some idiot before you. So that I'll get the first appointment of the day. I'll get it out of the way and then I'll just go do whatever. So I was sitting at home reading Facebook greetings, birthday greetings and stuff. And then I had to laugh because I get the call from the doc, and I wasn't laughing at that point, but after I got the call, I read one of the birthday greetings from my friend Sue, and she said, "Wishing you a birthday surprise." We had a little conversation a couple weeks after that. I'm like, you need to be more specific next year, because I'm like, that is not what I wanted. But yeah, Dr. Becker, this ENT guy who had done, he had done a little biopsy on me, and then he did surgery to take the to buy. Well, actually, I think the surgery came later to biopsy the tumor. But when they did the scan, I think they were expecting, I don't know what they were expecting to see. I was thinking it was what my dad, because my dad's a doc too. And I thought everybody thought that it was related to some gum surgery I'd had, and that it was just draining into my lymph nodes, because the first tumor was like right above my collarbone. And then when they got the scans back, had an 8 by 7 by 5 centimeter tumor sitting right on top of my heart. And there were tumors going up from there into my neck. And that was when he said, we don't know exactly what it is. He said, but you are definitely in for chemo and maybe in for radiation. And then he said, I've already talked to your dad about this. I was like, well, that was good. They can talk about it as professionals, and now I don't have to have that conversation. So that was great. But it was, I'm not going to lie, that was scary because I literally wondered, I'm like, am I going to make it to my next birthday? So that first week, and that was well, you'd asked about the before and after. There's a before and after element even within the diagnosis and whatnot, because there was a 2 or so week period where we knew it was cancer, but we didn't know what kind. And so not knowing what kind means you don't know how it's going to get treated. You don't know what the survival rate is or anything like that. And then at the end, when it was all over, there was still a little spot in my chest that was lighting up on the scans. And they said, well, it's probably scar tissue, but it might be something else. And about 5% of the time, only about 5% of the time, is it an active tumor. It's usually scar tissue. And that's, the 5% you're thinking, okay, well, that's, those are pretty low odds. But I was also a trader at the Chicago Board of Trade for a while. And I know that things that only should happen less than 5% of the time happen a lot more often than that. So I was a bit traumatized by that piece. So there was this uncertainty at the end. And that was one of the big lessons for me was, who am I in the face of uncertainty? And I can look in the eye and tell you, I was not the most charming version of myself ever. I wasn't a raving lunatic, but I was definitely short-tempered at times. And the second, the part of the bookend at the end, when they came with, spoiler alert, I survived and everything was fine. And it was not any kind of a tumor, but it was a bit scary. And I was a little more relaxed, a little more even keel at that point, but it was still, that was freaky because by the way, if it had been cancer at that point, it wouldn't have been more chemo. It would have been a bone marrow transplant. So the degree of difficulty would have shot up enormously. It would have been a completely different ballgame.
Wow. Yeah. So we're conditioned, I think, in how we're brought up, that we have an emotion-driven reaction when we get the unexpected, whether it's new, anything. I didn't see this coming, or I wasn't prepared for what is happening, and and I think we literally were conditioned to it's not just innate, because I know there's a fourth way to respond, but fight, flight, or freeze.
Right.
And so you came out a fighter, came out swinging after the initial shock, or did you want to run away, or did you free? I mean, what was your initial kind of mindset?
My initial one was, the word that comes to mind is gasp. It was like, so there was of the three that you just laid out, which are, I agree, those are usually the options. I was closer to freeze in that moment, and not in a paralyzed sense, but in all right, let's process this sense. And as I said, while I was processing it, I was a bit unnerved, to say the least. But what I didn't go into, a lot of people go into fight mode because you hear people talk about, oh, I'm going to kick cancer's ass. And, they use all these things. I literally never felt that because it just didn't feel right to me. Because I realized almost immediately, and there wasn't really a turning point. It was sort of, like I said, it seemed pretty almost the time of it all happening. It was like it all descended at once. It's kind of like when you're going through something like that, you're not experiencing, at least I didn't experience things in like a linear, like this happened and then this happened and this happened. It was more like an everything at once.
Yeah.
And
tornado.
Yeah, exactly. And part of that everything at once was this feeling of relative peace, in the sense that I'm not fighting this. This came to teach me something, and I need to figure out what that lesson is. And later I had conversations with my dear friend Jackie Hart, who was going through, she was in stage 4 cancer at that point. And she was one of these really wise souls. And I remember talking to her about it. And we talked about, and she was the one who kept put the words to it. She said, I'm walking with it.
Hmm.
Uh, and I love that, because if you're walking with something, you're meeting it, not necessarily as a friend, but you're meeting it as an equal, or as so that you're on a journey together. And the words that you use are important. So, for example, and my friend Shen Robinson was also instrumental in my understanding of the vocabulary around it. We talked about the fact that I never once used the word have. A lot of times people say, I have this, I have that. Even it's as simple as saying that they have a cold. Well, that's a possession, which means that you're holding on to it. Verbally, you are in that moment holding on to it. So we changed that vocabulary around and talked about, I'm experiencing tumors. I'm going through treatment, which is different, because in that moment, the tumors are an unwelcome guest. They're not permanent. And you're making it clear in the way that you talk about them that they're not permanent. And that's really important, because words are powerful and our bodies
Yeah.
can be very literal at times. So if you talk about having it or possessing it or trying to kick its ass, you're fighting something and you're taking ownership of it at the same time. That's a horrific combination.
Yeah, I'm taking notes. I'm not ignoring you. 'Cause I'm looking down. Is kind of what I hear you saying. Uh, there's a fine line be, between um, resigning to it is what it is kind of mindset, and resigning yourself to your your circumstances, versus I'm content with where I'm at, but I know where I want to go, and you're not resigning yourself to this is shit happens and that's happening to me, kind of
Well,
deal.
exactly, because that's more of a victim sort of thing. And
Yeah.
and the way I looked at it, it was an active acceptance. It was, and I've never used that phrase before, but that's, I was okay. So I have this, or I'm there. You see how easy it is to slip into that vocabulary. I am experiencing this right now. I'm dealing with it. Okay, what am I learning from it? Because I really did believe that it was a gift. And by the way, one of the things, this was an interesting moment in the whole journey. Maybe I should let you be the judge of that, but whatever. So I'm meeting with the doctor, and his head nurse was there as well. And she was great. Her name was Betsy. And I was very curious about everything. I'm always very curious about things. And I asked in one of my early appointments with them, I said, what is known about what causes this? Because I know my body is very literal. Like if I'm dealing with, financial issues or whatever, that's going to show up as lower back pain. And it does for a lot of people, because if you think about it, your spine, in between your hips and your rib cage, it's unsupported for that period. That's like the most unsupported place in your body. And it's what's holding your whole upper body up. So if you are feeling not stable financially or some other way, it's not uncommon for pain to show up there, right? So I know that there are things like that I've experienced. If I have a cold, it's almost and you see, again, I use that word. If I'm going through a cold, experiencing cold, it's almost always because there's a conversation that I'm not having with somebody, and the words are trapped, and it turns into congestion. It's almost always once in a while I'll get a cold where I can't attribute it to anything, but almost always there's a conversation that I'm holding back on. And so I know my body's literal. So I was really curious. So I asked, what's known about this? And she looked at me, and her answer really surprised both of us, because she said, you didn't cause this. And it was really interesting, because I'm thinking to myself, that was not the question I asked you. But my gut level reaction to what she had just said in that moment is, I don't agree with that. I do think I caused this. And then I realized, as I put it together, so rewind, literally almost exactly a year before all this went down, I had a very short, but really intense relationship with this woman that I'd met on a scuba trip. And she and I had gone on vacation together. And it was amazing. The chemistry was amazing. Everything was great. And she was one of the few people I've ever met that I was like, wow, She's incredible. I could definitely see myself spending, my life with her. And so I had very high hopes. I'll spare you all the details. That did not play out the way I thought it was going to. And so there was a disappearing act involved, not mine. Usually I was the one who did that, but in this case, it was not me. And so I was devastated. And so for the
Wow.
better part of a year, I was really sad. And there was a mix of anger and frustration and everything else going on. But deep down, it was sadness. And think about, I mean, my body's literal. It was not lost on me that the biggest tumor was sitting right on top of my heart.
Oh,
So
wow.
you can tell me all day that I didn't cause it, but I'm going to disagree with you because, and I'm not saying that, by the way, as a victim. I'm just raising my hand and saying I am, and I don't blame her either, by the way, because it's on me how I digest life. If I'm digesting life in a bad way and I'm circling the drain emotionally and I've got all this negative
Mhm.
energy, our bodies are mostly water. So if you got negative energy floating through water for a year, don't think for a second that's not going to have negative consequences, because it will. And in my case, guess what? There were negative consequences closest to the place where most of the pain was being felt. I don't
Wow.
think it's a coincidence.
Wow. Yeah, you kind of, in a way, you just described your Job experience. The message I'm hearing is, it's not what happens to you that is as important as what happens in you, and your perspective of, not saying why did God do this to me, or uh, why me, but what lesson am I to learn? And I love the book of Job, not in a kind of a weird kind of way, I guess. Uh, that his three friends were trying to convince him to get him to admit, what did you do to deserve what's happening? And he didn't want to blame. He wasn't doing a blame game kind of deal. It's like, what am I supposed to learn out of this? And uh, and towards the end of it, he tells you what he learned. God is God, and I am not. Uh, kind of experience, and then that spiritual uh, revelation um, gave him the contentment and the peace of mind, even though he didn't like. I mean, he lost everything: his family, his wife. He lost everything. He was destitute and physically, just destroyed. But he didn't blame God, and he didn't blame his circumstances. It's what am I supposed to learn from this? And once he learned that lesson, then his life, he got more than 100-fold back, type deal. So um, it's kind of like, this is a weird analogy. I'm that Irish setter that sees a squirrel that runs and goes, "Hey, squirrel!" Is It's almost like, did you ring the bell at the end of your chemo? Was that a
No,
thing?
it's interesting. They
Oh,
they didn't do that. I see people post that on LinkedIn and stuff, and I thought to myself one day, there was no bell. But honestly, I don't care, because I've never been a traditional person, and I'm not much for ceremony. So in a way, I'm glad I didn't.
yeah. So what was your uh, I guess aha moment, I guess, that revelation, because you talk about in your book and in your speaking, the spirituality um, transformation. What that looked like for you?
Well, it's evolving, hence why I'm still here, but that's good. So it's the way it showed up for me is, first of all, more as I said, there was the awareness of feeling the love. Like, I used to think, I thought tears of joy was a cliche. I literally did not know they were real until I went through the treatment. When I felt the love of the people, and when I say that, I have never felt more love in my life than when I went through that. Now, would I want to go through it again to feel that? No, I'm
Yeah,
fine. It's
yeah,
good. We can move on from there. But it opened me up. And then that ultimately, well, it's funny because this has been popping into my head while we've been talking. And I wasn't even thinking about it at the beginning of the conversation, but it opened me up to being more in tune with other things like dreams. Because a couple of years ago, I had a dream that literally saved my life. And there's a time earlier in my life, not so long ago, I would almost certainly have missed that, not paid attention to it, and I probably wouldn't be here. And so those are the things. It wasn't like one big moment necessarily. There was a series of things that happened of where I just realized that I was becoming more and more open. Like one woman I work with, I remember she said to me, because I do a lot of corporate training and speaking and stuff. And she looked at me one day and she said she hadn't seen me speak in a while. And after the tumors were over and I'd gone through all that treatment and stuff, she looked at me. She said, Rob, she said, you were a great speaker before. She said, you are off the charts now. She's like, you are amazing. And I don't know. I didn't notice a difference in terms of how I was showing up from a presentation standpoint, except that I'm much more open and I'm much more, I don't want to use the word honest because that seems like I was dishonest before, but much more transparent would be a better word.
Mm-hmm.
That I'm very open. I don't try to pretend to be anybody I'm not. I've got all kinds of flaws. I've made all kinds of mistakes, and I'm happy to share them with people if I think it's something that's going to help them avoid that same pain or issue. So that in that sense, I'm much more open than I was before, and I'll always care about what people think. And I think most people, anybody who says they don't care what people think, I don't think they're being totally honest. But there's a big element of me that's like, I've come to terms with the fact that not everybody's going to love me, and I don't care. I'm fine with that because I'm not going to love them either. So that's it's only fair. But yeah, that was probably the biggest thing was just the openness, and I'm so grateful for that spiritual side of just being in touch with things like that.
Yeah. So you are the first and only guest actually, you're the first and only person I've ever even met who has a World Series ring in their genealogy. Your great-grandfather? Or
my great-grandfather, yeah. Billy Sullivan Sr., yeah.
Was the catcher on the 06 White Sox?
You have done your homework, sir. Yes, indeed. He was. He played from 1898 to I think 1912, and then he managed the team for a little while. And he knew all the players involved in the Black Sox scandal, but he was not managing at that point. And my dad said he never talked about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, what'd he invent?
He invented the chest protector. So literally, and this is a cool story. Catchers, I didn't realize this. I always knew that he invented the chest protector, but I never really thought about pre-chest protector. Well, pre-chest protector, catchers, the backstop is where it is because that's where catchers used to stand. And they would catch pitches off a bounce, and umpires would stand behind the pitcher to call balls and strikes. So he was the first catcher to literally be right behind the plate, crouching, catching pitches.
Wow. And he invented what we call the catcher's chest protector. And it was, this is going somewhere to a question. So he invented it. He got the patent for it, sold the patent to, and I'm not going to ask you what that sports company's name is today. And basically really got royally screwed in the big picture. Am I right so far?
You man, have you done your homework? Yes.
All right. So here's my question, because I think you've touched on it a little bit, and so I'm not going to beat around the bush. How important is forgiveness in your healing journey, or your life journey to begin with?
Wow, huge. There's a book that I read by, I believe his name is Colin Tipping, called Radical Forgiveness. There's two books by the same title. If you read it, you want the one written by the guy, which is unusual because usually it's the women who have the better intuitives. But anyway, great book. And it's it's really powerful because it does help you realize that a lot of the suffering we do is really self-inflicted, and that when you learn to let go of some of that stuff, that there's a real power in that, and that you're doing it more for yourself than for the person you're forgiving in many cases, because of the anger and the frustration and everything else. And to tie it back, like, I know Billy was not at all happy that he had sold the patent. I mean, literally, there's not a sport that doesn't use some version of that. So
Mhm.
our family would be in a very different financial condition had he not done that. And it's, in a way, though, it's a good thing. It's been a powerful thing for me because, from a forgiveness standpoint, obviously I'm not going to like not forgive him or be like forever angry at him, that we had to like make our own way in the world or whatever. That's not the point. But it was very transformative in a way for me, because when I teach negotiation and when I enter into negotiation for things on my own behalf, I am much, much more aware of intellectual property, because I didn't invent anything, but I have intellectual property when I speak of, the topics and things that I've created,
Mhm.
etc. And I am very protective of my rights. I just did a negotiation with something. I can't say too much about what it was, but what I will say is that the intellectual property aspect of it turned out to be worth as much as what we were negotiating in the underlying contract. And the people who were working on it with me you could see how wide-eyed they got when they realized the way that I had positioned that part of it. There were mistakes I made in the negotiation, to be sure, but that was the part that was the turning point. And I totally stuck to my guns, and I did it because that's, in a way, it's, I don't know, you could go, some people might refer to it as generational healing. I'm totally fine with that, because there is an element of that.
Mm.
Just letting go of, and it's not even forgiveness, but just letting go of the things that have happened before. You don't have to continue suffering over things. You just write a new story. And that's what happened to him has become a new story for me on any number of occasions, because I've had a lot of negotiations where those lessons that he learned the hard way, I didn't have to learn. And
Sure.
that, I never really thought about it until just now, but maybe that's why I'm so passionate about helping people with the mistakes that I've made and being honest and open about it, so that they don't have to go through it. So just
Yeah.
stop the cycle in a different way.
Yeah. That's well. So, and you talk about negotiations. I'm about halfway through the book. Chris Voss, never
Oh,
split the difference.
great
Uh,
book.
yeah, and then um, and then I'm also about halfway through Peter Dreek's book on the code of trust. And Peter's actually going to be on the podcast here in about a month or so. I want to get Chris too, but I don't know anybody that knows him. But the whole idea, the concept of another great book, "Ego is the Enemy" by Ryan Holiday, that egocentric position we find ourselves in is probably one of the most toxic things that we can do, that submarines our opportunities, our relationships, and our future. How did your journey? What I'm trying to think of how to ask this question. If you did not have, I'm sorry, not have. If you had not experienced cancer, would you be in the same place? Do you think you'd be in the same place you are today, as far as your whole person?
Wow. Interesting. I don't, in a lot of respects, because, well, think of it in terms of the book. I knew there was a missing chapter, because I wrote my first book, the first draft, in like 6 months. I rewrote it a couple times, but within 2 years it was done. This one was like 10 years in the making. And I never had this feeling that it was finished. Of course, I secretly hoped that the missing chapter was winning the lottery or meeting the Swedish bikini queen or something fun like that. I didn't ever dream that it was going to be what it was. But that was really interesting, because to me, that experience tied together all kinds of things that I had never really thought about, or I had thought about it, but it connected the dots. It's one friend of mine talked at the end of in the story at the end of the book, because a lot of people, like 70 some people, shared stories for the book, and she talked about how a lot of the signposts in our lives are only apparent in hindsight,
Hmm.
which is fascinating when you look at it and think about it that way. And that was absolutely true in my case, that there were things that prepared me for that moment and prepared me to go through that with the way that I did. And it didn't, I will tell you, it did not feel graceful at all. But like, for example, I remember, when I got diagnosed, my parents, they were raised by depression era
Hmm.
folks. And so they had a depression era mentality, which is a scarcity mentality around money and time and everything else. And so they lovingly gave me the advice. They're like, don't tell anybody about this. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm going to be bald in 3 weeks. I don't see how this is going to be a secret. Yeah. And once again, that didn't ever resonate with me. So I did it my own way. I wrote, because I'm a writer, I wrote about my experience, and I would do these little updates. I did like 12 or 13 of them throughout the course of the journey. And it was fascinating to me because I was doing it for a couple of reasons. My main reason was I wanted to control the narrative. And by that, what I mean is I did not want people catastrophizing on my behalf. I know how powerful energy can be. I didn't want a whole bunch of friends visualizing me checking out early, because that's not a good
Hmm.
energy to be putting in the universe. So I wanted to be really clear. The doctor has never once used the word remission. He believes this is something, he's confident this is something that can be cured. And so let's approach it that way. And if you feel inspired to support, send positive energy, pray for treatments that aren't too painful or disruptive. And that's it. I wasn't looking for sympathy or anything. I'm just literally asking people for positive energy and visualizing that sort of thing, which people did hugely. And so that was a really powerful moment for me. And then the writing part, but where I was getting, one of the surprising things was people, who would say, Rob, you are so strong, you are so graceful, you're such a great example. And I'm sitting here feeling like, okay, I'm a guy. I just raised my hand and said, I'm sick. I can't do this by myself and I need help. There wasn't anything, there was no intention of appearing strong. There
Hmm.
was no intention of appearing like a leader or anything like that. I was literally being myself in that moment. And I'm not pretending, I'm not hiding, I'm not doing anything other than say, hey, this is what's going on, and just do what you can to visualize. So,
Yeah, it's just kind of funny what your parents, said to you. So, and being of Irish lineage, uh, my I grew up, and it took me forever to lose this mindset. And some people, they call it stoicism. Um, some places, the Irish, we just call it. If you ignore something long enough, it'll go away or be replaced by something else. So it's like, it's like, you don't need to tell anybody, because just ignore it and it'll work itself out. And and that was the Irish side. My dad, but my mom was, her genealogy was French German, and so that was completely uh, diff- different experience. And I went the Irish route. I went to ignore it long enough, and it'll go away. Well, it doesn't, and it may go away because something worse happens. But yeah, I just got a kick out of how your mindset and how people perceive our spirituality, if you will, if you want to call that your faith, is oh, you're so strong, you're a hero, you're this, that, or the other thing. And I almost think it's because they see that lacking in their own life, and that they don't, they wish they had what you have, in the way, no, they don't want to have cancer or experience cancer, but they wish they could be that focused or that content or that positive forward looking, because the data's out there. We have like whatever 50,000 thoughts a day, and 80% of them are negative. and uh, and we fall into that trap and the lies of you can't have a fulfilling life after cancer, or while you're going through cancer. Um, and your testimony is exactly 100% opposite of that.
Oh,
So
totally. Yeah. Well, and it was interesting too, because to your point about people seeing themselves or seeing a different way of experiencing something. Uh, I had a friend from high school who I'll never forget. She sent me a text while I was going through it, and she said, "Thank you for sharing your journey." She said, "My dad went through this, and he didn't tell anybody what he was going through at all. So we had no idea what was, and he had, it sounded like a very similar diagnosis. And she said, we literally had no clue what he was going through because he wouldn't open up or talk about it. And she said, this has helped me more than you can ever imagine. And a number of people who went through it, that was one, in the spirit of sharing to help other people, I was so touched by the number of people who shared my journey. And I still send zip files of it out to people who want to see it. I just sent one out last week where one complete stranger I sent it to emailed me a couple of weeks later, and he said, I have given what you wrote to everyone in my family. And he said, you have no idea how many people you've touched. He said, because they all wanted to know what I'm going through. And he said, you said it so much more, beautifully. And I was, there's the good and the bad. There's the, my friend Susie, I love this. She was sitting in bed reading one of my updates one night, and she burst out laughing. And her husband looks at her. He's like, what are you laughing about? And she's like, oh, Rob's post. And he's like, I thought he was going through cancer. And she's like, he is. She's like, what's funny about that? But there were so many funny moments. And if you take yourself too seriously, and if you catastrophize, well, guess what? That's more of the same negative energy that brought it on in the first place. Hello. But then you're going to miss out on all those really funny things. And it's funny, and I get it. People treat you. I didn't want anybody to treat me like they were walking around on eggshells or anything. And I one of the things that was super powerful was my friend. I'll never forget. So he texted me after I put the first post up, and in my intention, I don't know if I said it in the first post, but my intention was I want to control the narrative. And his comment on his name is Paul. Paul says, Rob, I'm going to get right to the point. Are there any concert tickets you can't use? And do you want me to bring you had? So I'm like, and I was like, I wrote it. I might even call him like, Paul, thank you. Like, that is exactly what I needed to hear, because it reinforced in my mind that, yeah, you don't have to treat me differently. Everything's fine. Everything's great. But like even the doctors would. If you want, I can share one story. You may have to cut it if you don't like it, and won't be offended at all. But if you want me to go there, I will. One of the doctor's stories that was kind of funny.
I'll tell you what, I don't do any editing because it's I want people to get the real deal. So if you want to share a story, but before you jump into the doctor thing, one of the things that I think really reinforces what everything you're saying is we are so quick to believe the self-fulfilling prophecy mindset when it comes to bad things. Yep. But we don't have the same enthusiasm for self-fulfilling prophecy when we want to talk about the good things. We'll take that negative road. Yep. So easily, or it's like I posted something the other day, is how quick we are to believe the critical, what we call lies about somebody else, but so slow to, in our own lives, critique ourselves and going, hey, what you're doing is not good. But we'll believe it when, you see it in the news now. Yeah, that guy's getting everything he deserves now because X, Y, or Z. But when it comes to us, we go, I didn't deserve this. Well, yeah, you did. kind of deal. That you treat your body not like a temple, but like a garbage can, then
Yeah.
you're going to get garbage. So I had to share that, because that, as you're telling your story, that's what I'm triggering, is that self-awareness is so important, and that to be optimistic is not to be a fairy tale optimism. It's you can will reality into your life if you have the proper attitude, I guess is the way to put it. So, so your doctor story, as long as it's not too
Oh,
gross,
no,
or
no, no, exactly.
okay.
Yeah. So the most wonderful, mild mannered guy. I'll never forget this guy. And he was just the kind of person. He was like my dad. He's just great bedside manner and everything. And one day he looked at me and he said, "This is early on when we were talking about starting the treatment and everything else." He said, "Were you thinking about having kids?" I said, "Well, that's a team sport under ideal circumstances. And since I was single, I was like, and he goes, well, all right." He goes, "You just answered the question." He goes, "I'm going to have, somebody from urology come up and talk to you about putting, freezing some sperm, because what you're going to go through is not good for that." And I was like, okay, fair enough, whatever. So he's like, "Just sit tight, just wait." So I'm sitting there, and this young woman comes in, and she's probably mid to late 20s, super energetic. And a lot of people, because one of the things I teach is presentation skills. I know that a lot of times when people are nervous, they start talking really fast. And so somebody who's already a fast talker and excitable might even go a little bit faster. I don't know how much of that was her natural style and how much of it was perhaps nervous energy, but some of it I do think were nervous based on how she responded. So she comes marching in the room and like introduces herself, and then she goes off on this thing that she had done like 100 times before, and she's talking about sperm and ejaculation and freezing and all kinds of stuff like that. And then she looks at me and she's like, "So what do you think about all this?" And then it was like the first time she had paused, and I looked at her and I said, "I think it's kind of funny." And she's like, "Funny?" She's like, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, I spent my whole life teaching them to swim backwards, and now you're telling me I got to pay for their storage." And she burst out laughing, and she goes, "Oh, phew." She said, "You're not one I'm going to have to worry about." And I said, "No, you're definitely not going to have to worry about me." I said, "Are there people you have to worry about?" She said, "Yeah, almost everybody I talk to is just like devastated." And she said, "I love the fact that you're just like, yeah, whatever."
Yeah. That's funny. And you have to have not a flippant sense of humor, or a dark humor about challenges and obstacles, but you do have to be able to see, um, a little bit of humor in things. And I remember I accidentally shot a chair in my office once, and police department, yeah, and I was a commander. I had a ton of people working for me, sergeants and officers and civilian staff. And I'll spare you the story of how I did it, but it was stupid on my part. It was not intentional, but it was still stupid. And the next day, because I'm worried about, because it's, you're going to get a written reprimand, which I deserved. But I'm thinking what's going through my mind is, I got these sergeants and officers and I don't know, 50, 60 people that I'm responsible for. They're going to think I'm an idiot, and a crappy leader type deal. But I come back to work the next day, and I had two doors that went into my office. One went out to the secretary in the public area, and one went to where the sergeant's offices were, and roll call and locker rooms and all that kind of stuff. And that's the way I came into my office. And my doors are locked, at least I thought they were. And there's this typed note not on the door, but to the right of the door on the wall, and it's typed out, and it said, "If the lieutenant invites you to have a seat, politely decline and remain standing." And, and so, and I had a pretty good office and a conference table that had 10 chairs around it. And then I had two guest chairs, in front of my desk, and then my chair behind the desk. And so I had a little bit of a chuckle, and I left the sign there. And I walk into my office, and every chair in my office has a bullseye target taped to it. And then on my desk was this clear, like a recipe box that your grandmother had or whatever. And it was filled with ashes and from somebody's fireplace. And there was a type note next to that said, "Here lie the remains of the chair executed by Lieutenant Welsh and they put the date, the day before." And I was getting ready to go on vacation. This is on a Friday now when I come back in the office. And on Saturday, I start a 2-week vacation and we were going to take the kids to a beach. And next to the ashes was a dart gun with 2 darts with a type note that said, "Lieutenant, this might be safer for you to take on vacation." And so I'm laughing, except it did strike me, who the hell has keys to my office to come in and do all this? But what I got, the lesson I got out of it, because I'm going to get a written reprimand. It was a really stupid thing that I did. But my folks could have some fun with me, knowing, hey, don't be, telling me, hey, boss, don't be so serious about it. We still love you. And, it's, and all that. And so that took the sting out of the fact that I was an idiot and that I was going to have a reprimand on my books for the next 2 years. And so I can kind of see, where you're saying that in the midst of what could have been a catastrophic event, that you keep a sense of humor and you don't have a meltdown. That it's good for the soul.
Yeah. My dad told me halfway through that, he said, Rob, he said, when I was in medical school, he said, your diagnosis was a death sentence. It's like, that's humbling when you think about it. Because again, I didn't really appreciate that. And there's so much, I mean, not to be melodramatic or whatever, but like I had appendicitis when I was 10. In a different era, that would have been a death sentence too.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. Yeah. No, I get it. I totally get it, man. This is fun. Is any more books on the horizon?
Yeah, I've got a couple that I'm working on. I'm going to do one on loosely related to my travel experiences and the humorous side of all that. I haven't quite figured out exactly how it's going to play out, and I'd love to do a follow-up to this, a Trek Within, because there are so many people who've shared stories, and some of the stories are so inspiring. Like there's a couple of vanishing twin stories and the things that people have gone through. And they're not looking for attention when they say, just use my first name or don't mention my name at all, but you're welcome to use my story. That's not somebody who's trying to do a hoax or make something up with they're doing it because they believe, they know in their heart this is an important story and that people should hear it, and they may have very legitimate reasons for not wanting to be public about it, which I respect.
Yeah. Well, you remember Paul Harvey?
I remember the name. I didn't know much about him.
Oh man, Google him and listen to. He had his own radio show, and this is back in the '60s, and I'm not sure when he passed away, but it was Paul Harvey, and it was called The Rest of the Story. And he would tell you a story that everybody in the world may know about or whatever. Or like, for example, he would do, this is what he was said about your great grandfather. Hey, the rest of the story, and he'd talk about the vest that protects catchers in 100-mile-an-hour pitch and all that kind of stuff. And he'd go, but let me tell you the rest of the story. And then he'd tell your grandfather's story about being a catcher in the 1906 World Series and all that kind of stuff. And you're going, that's like, we learn something from the stories of other people's lives. And so often we go through life and we don't know the rest, how the rest of the story ends. That I shared a story about a 12-year-old kid that I spoke to that had run away from home. Well, he didn't come home from school. The long and short of it is I got the call he came home at 1 o'clock that morning, and his parents, and this was an African-American family in a drug-infested, crime-infested neighborhood. And they said, we're at our wits' end. We don't know what to do. We're actually paying tuition, sending to private school, which is why we can't afford to get out of this neighborhood kind of deal. Will you talk to him? And I'm a 30-some-odd-year-old white guy cop, and talking to a 12-year-old black kid lives in a crap neighborhood. What am I going to say that's going to make a difference? But I said, yeah, I'll talk to him. And I talked to him like a parent, not like a cop. 3 or 4 minutes later, 18 years later, I'm in line at Kroger's, off duty, checking groceries out, and this voice behind this little old lady that was right behind me goes, "Hey, Welsh, is that you?" And I turned and looked, and it's like a 6-foot-something black guy, 30s, and I'm thinking, God, what I arrest him for? And that's my thought process, because it was the unexpected, and nobody calls me by my last name except bad guys or other cops, because that was what's on my name tag. And so I'm like, yes, sir. He goes, yeah, you probably don't remember me. I go, no, sir, I don't. He goes, when I was 12 years old, you came to the house because I didn't come home from school, and you talked to me. I just want to tell you that I graduated from college. I'm married. I have 2 kids, and I want to say thank you.
Wow.
So we don't know. Yeah, we're reluctant to share our stories because, people will think I'm bragging or I'm an egotistical, knucklehead or whatever. And that's not true. The stories we share change other people's lives, and we may not even know it. But still keep living your life that the story turns out well, you hope. And so that's why I podcast, is to get people's stories out there, because your story is going to change somebody's life somewhere, and you may never know it, but God does. And that person appreciates you for sharing your story. So kind of in that kind of mindset, any last, cherished words you can share with the audience.
No. First of all, I agree with you 100%. You never know what life you're going to change. It could be something super simple. Even recently, I hosted an international traveler, and 2 or 3 weeks after she left, she wrote me this review, because it's a website for people who travel and stuff. And this glowing thing about how she keeps thinking back to our conversations, and this is a woman that I talked to for less than an hour and a half total. But like how meaningful it had all been for her. And it's like, and you just have no idea. And sometimes it's literally just giving them the gift of listening. And you are not only a fabulous researcher, but you're also a really good listener. And so anybody who comes on your podcast is going to benefit from that. So my closing words would be to your listeners, more than anything, of keep watching this guy, because not only is his heart in the right place in terms of bringing people and sharing stories with the world, but somebody who's being transparent and giving in the process. And at times, I'm sure at some personal cost to you that may or may not be apparent at every moment, but that's you're giving people a gift, and I am deeply grateful for it. So thank you.
Wow. Thank you for your kind words, man. Thank you. We'll leave it at that. That's all right. Now I had chills. One last thing before we sign off, because I don't want to screw up saying I want you to correct my pronunciation. You started a company with another guy named Barry Van Zyl, or is it Zyl?
Barry Van Zyl, yes.
Yeah, yes. And so you guys have, and he's a internationally recognized drummer, consultant and educator based out of South Africa. And you guys have a website. Tell us a little bit about that website and how people can reach out to you.
Sure. Sullivan Zyl, it's just Sullivan and then ZYL.com, because it combines our 2 names. in that moment. So it's a website where it talks about the speaking that we do together. And Barry, as you said, he was a drummer for Johnny Clegg for 19 years. And for people who don't know Johnny Clegg is the South African musician who inspired Paul Simon's Graceland album. So if you like that album, you would love Johnny Clegg. And Barry is everybody in Johnny's band, some of the nicest people I've ever met in my life. So that he and I worked together. We found, through a friendship, we found a common passion for training and inspiring people. And so he and I have a listening workshop that we do. So I approach it more from I don't know what standpoint you'd call it, just more of a traditional training standpoint. And he brings in the drums and the music and helps people listen differently, not just to music, but to everything else based on rhythm, which is really fun. It's really wild. So that's just one of the things that he and I do together, but he's great. So sullivanzale.com. Yeah.
Awesome. And we'll put that in the show notes as well. Rob, man, I'm telling you, this was so fun. I'm so glad that Brig and Chad reached out and said, "Hey, you got to meet this guy." And what a blessing to have you on. To our audience, thank you so much. You're faithful listening and sharing and commenting on our guests. We're now, I checked this morning, we're now in 60 countries on 6 continents, and wow. It's all because of you and your desire to be a better warrior servant leader in your personal and professional lives. Be sure to follow us on YouTube. I'm on Instagram, LinkedIn, Substack at Pat Welsh, JD. People ask me, why do you have to put your JD behind that? That's so egotistical. I go, no, it's not. There's a famous gardener lady in California. Her name is Pat Welsh. And if I Google just Pat Welsh, I see all her fabulous stuff. So I added JD so you don't have to be consumed with all her gardening tips. So follow at Pat Welsh, JD, and check out our books on Amazon, Warrior Servant Leader, Life Behind the Badge, and Warrior Servant Leader, Life Behind the Cross. And as I end every episode, always, always, always strive to do the right thing at the right time, the right way, and for the right reasons, because that's what warriors, servants, and leaders do every day, every time. Love you all, and see you next week.